Imagine a river so alive it used to shake the ground when the salmon came home. Now picture that same river, choked, sluggish, running warm and green with toxic algae. No fish, no ceremony, just silence where there used to be thunder. That is not a hypothetical. That is the Klamath River, and this is the story of the people who refused to let it stay dead. The Klamath was once the third most abundant salmon-producing river on the west coast. Not a small creek, a churning ancient corridor connecting the mountains of Oregon to the Pacific Ocean in California. For thousands of years, the people along its banks built everything around it. Their food, their ceremonies, their whole sense of who they were, all of it ran with the current. The Klamath's 15,000 square mile basin has been the ancestral territory of the Yurok, Karuk, Hoopa Valley, and Klamath tribes since time immemorial. Historically, an estimated 880,000 salmon traveled upriver each year to spawn. When 4 dams built between 1918 and 1964 to generate electricity blocked that route, more than 90% of those fish vanished. Not because of drought or plague, because somebody decided electricity was more important than an entire civilization's way of life. With each dam that went up, the salmon runs shrank, the water warmed, and the tribes watched something sacred get slowly drained from their world. But they remembered. They kept the songs, the ceremonies, the knowledge of what the river was supposed to be. Even when the fish were gone, the memory of the giants stayed alive. Then, in September 2002, the river didn't just decline, it collapsed. A massive fish kill left over 70,000 salmon floating belly up, dead from diseases that flourish in warm, low water. 70,000 fish, dead in weeks. One tribal member was 7 years old when it happened. It was devastating seeing thousands of dead bodies the same size as me in the river, she said. The fish aren't just food, they are relatives in the deepest spiritual sense. And they were rotting on the bank. That moment was one of unbearable grief and renewed resolve. That resolve has carried through generations and is now transforming the river itself. So here's a question for you. If you had watched the river that defined your entire culture get poisoned in front of you, would you spend the next 20 years fighting to fix it? Or would the scale of the problem crush you into silence? Comment your answer below. Because what happened next on the Klamath is one of the most relentless, decade-spanning fights in American environmental history. The Undam the Klamath campaign filled legislative chambers, corporate headquarters, and agency offices. In 2004, a 30-member tribal delegation even traveled to Edinburgh to pressure the company's shareholders, then Scottish-owned, making their case before them. They crossed an ocean. These weren't people with unlimited resources. These were fishing communities who had already lost nearly everything, taking their fight to another continent because they had no other move left. The engineers faced their own nightmare. Removing 4 massive hydroelectric dams meant managing the release of 5 million cubic yards of sediment, a century's worth of silt, compressed in those reservoirs like a loaded gun. Release it wrong, and you don't restore a river. You bury it. Workers extracted 100,000 cubic yards of concrete and 2,000 tons of steel. But removal was the predictable part. The real challenge was what came next. With the concrete gone, thousands of acres of exposed reservoir bed, gray mud, steep banks, zero vegetation, had to become a living landscape again. Crews left tracks in the mud, spreading seed and planting acorns by hand. Helicopters rained seed from the sky and lofted entire trees through the air. 2,200 acres of reservoir footprint replanted with native species. And it wasn't just engineers making the calls. The tribes weren't stakeholders in a boardroom. They were on the ground in the river, pointing to places that hadn't been documented in any textbook, but had been remembered in oral tradition for generations. Their knowledge of how to create off-channel habitats and how fish interact with them helped restoration teams recover historic salmon grounds. The engineers brought the machinery. The tribes brought the memory. As one engineer put it, the tribes were the heart and soul of the project. Dam removal began in summer 2023 with Copco 2. J.C. Boyle followed in 2024, then Copco 1, then Iron Gate Dam. By August 2024, the Klamath flowed freely from Lake Ewana to the Pacific for the first time in over a century. When the cofferdams broke and the water moved, a river of chocolate milk cut through raw, glistening mud. Ugly, but ugly is often what healing looks like at the start. Then the river did something that stunned even the people who had spent careers calculating exactly what should happen. Within 10 days of completing the in-water work at the farthest downstream dam, more than 6,000 Chinook salmon were observed migrating upstream into habitat blocked for over a century. 10 days, 100 years of blockage, and the fish showed up in 10 days. The first Chinook in more than 60 years were already spawning above the former Iron Gate Dam. A fall-run Chinook was identified in Oregon for the first time in over 100 years. The rapid return exceeded scientists' expectations, as if the salmon had been waiting just offshore, circling in the Pacific, holding their breath for a door to open. Picture a tribal elder who had spent decades in meetings, filing legal briefs, traveling to shareholder conferences in foreign countries, watching generation after generation grow up without the ceremony the salmon made possible, standing at the water's edge, watching a Chinook push upstream past a place where a dam used to be. That is not a data point. That is 100 years of grief reversing direction in real time. One tribal leader said it simply, "This is a time to honor their return by allowing them to spawn, rebuild, and restore the strength of their lineage. Let's give them the time and protection they need to thrive once again. They have come home." Early 2025 data confirmed a strong fall run, more than 10,000 fish over 2 feet long past the former Iron Gate Dam site, substantially more than in 2024, arriving weeks earlier than the year before. Fish were documented spawning in the Wood, Williamson, and Sprague rivers, and in cold water spring complexes around Upper Klamath Lake. The river is remembering its own rhythms, faster than anyone dared hope. Experts expect coho populations to recover in 6 to 12 years, Chinook in 15 to 20, in a river some had written off as unsavable. The project won the top honor in the American Council of Engineering Companies' 2026 Engineering Excellence Awards. The engineers earned their recognition, but the real prize never fit on a trophy. The Klamath is now being watched as a model for future dam removals across the country, the Eel River in Northern California, the Matalija Dam in the Ventura watershed, the Lockville Dam in North Carolina. The Klamath didn't just save itself, it wrote the blueprint. This story is not about concrete or salmon counts or engineering awards. It is about what happens when the people who carry the oldest knowledge of a place refuse to let that place die. The tribal communities of the Klamath didn't win because they had the most money or the most power. They won because they never stopped. 20 years of fighting, grieving, traveling, testifying, planting, and praying, and the river heard them. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment telling us which part hit hardest: the fish kill, the moment the salmon came back, or the fact that it took a century to undo what took a decade to build. Like the video if you want more stories about the people who refuse to let the natural world lose. And subscribe, because the next river story we're telling is just as wild, just as human, and just as worth your time. The giants came home, and the people standing on that bank earned every single one of them.